Hello, my name is Paul Jones, author of Concerning a Nation and several videos on Bible prophecy. Back in the 1990s, the world was a different place. The Soviet Union had gone, and the United States was the new global hyperpower. In 1997, the late Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, former National Security Advisor to President Carter, published a book called The Grand Chessboard. The book presented a program for how the new world could be controlled. American power was the reality, he explained, as he outlined how to make sure that this state of affairs continued. The key to ensuring the continuation of American supremacy was to ensure that other nations did not rise up to threaten that hegemony. Control of the Eurasian landmass was the key. To put it crudely, NATO at one end to confront Russia, even though Russia was flat on her back in the 90s, and then at the other end you had US forces in the Pacific to contain China. This obsolete policy of containment seems still to be the plan for the modern world under Joe Biden after the aberration of Donald Trump. There are, however, two problems. Containment is fine if you're containing what is known as an autarky, an entity which is economically self-contained, as was the Soviet bloc. China, on the contrary, is heavily interconnected with other nations and expanding into the world of finance and cyberspace. Even more questionable, this policy, plus the overuse of sanctions, pushes China and Russia together. Richard Nixon knew that you had to be friends with one of them, but that was in the days when presidents knew what they were doing. So much for the proposals of man. But how does all this fit in with what we've been saying about the biblical destiny of the US vis-à-vis Israel, and that crucial date of May 2017 when America lost her license as Israel's protector? President Biden is in power now, and if my timeline is right, he should represent a sea change in US attitudes to Israel and the Middle East. If you've seen my videos, you will know that Donald Trump was the final president in a line of 7 who blasphemously tried to divide the Holy Land with peace plans. After him, America's business with Israel was finished. Trump's only success was the Abraham Accords, which facilitated an already ongoing process of Israel joining the nations. Biden, therefore, must necessarily be something different, and he is. He pretends, like all American politicians, to be a friend of Israel, but we judge him by what he does. He has reinstated aid to the Palestinian Authority and to UNRWA, thus paying the wages of people who hate Israelis. He has retracted the designation of the Iran-backed Houthis as a terror group. He is desperately trying to re-enter the flawed JCPOA. Relations between Israel and the US have never been worse. Biden has reduced military assistance to Saudi Arabia and withdrawn military personnel and materiel from the Middle East, including missile defence equipment. And he has ordered the State Department to refer to the West Bank as occupied territory. Just imagine if he hated Israel. As I pointed out in my other videos, Israel now belongs to the military region called CENTCOM. She was formerly considered a component of the European theatre of operations. This change was part of a plan to encourage the region to do more to help itself. Truly, as I've said elsewhere, Israel is joining the nations. America is going. If only they can settle that elusive Iran issue. With Biden confirming Trump's plan to withdraw from Afghanistan, America will now have no presence there. And that means a lot of the backup personnel in Kuwait and the Gulf will also go. The US has been self-sufficient in oil for a while now. Most of the oil that comes out of the Gulf goes straight to Asia. China is making inroads into the region, and not just in Iran. She has invested heavily in Iraq and even Saudi Arabia, and has a military base in Djibouti. America spends a fortune policing the trade seaways which allow China to become richer, while Iran's huge missile threat in the Gulf makes it an unsafe place for US ships and bases. Did you know that England used to be part of the Roman Empire? When the Romans left in the 4th century, it was because the troops were needed elsewhere to fight encroaching invaders. Also, it was just too expensive to keep them there. Biden is essentially doing the same thing, patching up a fraying empire, trying to contain China and Russia while they fill the void left by an American departure from the Middle East. Of course, the pivot to Asia goes back as far as Clinton, but somehow the United States could never quite leave the Middle East, whose troubles seemed to come and find them. Now, most Americans are in denial about being an empire. This means that they find it harder to discern the patterns of decline, which often happen externally. The empire is invisible to them. Compare the British Empire. When Britain's time came to an end in 1947 to 48, there were clear signs. The loss of India being the greatest. Even then, the British didn't get the message until the Suez Crisis of 1956. What has America lost? Well, with Brexit, as one commentator observed, the US lost an umbilical link between them and the European Union. Britain was an English-speaking pro-market nation with the ability to promote the American view in Europe. That has now gone. And Biden, a globalist and supporter of the Irish Republican Army, is as secretly hostile to Brexit Britain as he secretly is to Israel. The US still has NATO, but European nations have some funny ideas about living near Russia and wanting to have a modus vivendi, while strategically vital allies like Turkey in the west and the Philippines in the east are not too sure whose side they're on anymore. Did you know also that 2017 was the worst year in American history for natural disasters? And it was also the worst year for recorded anti-Semitic attacks. Let's look at my timeline again. If you've read my book, you will know that the 1880s saw the worst outbreaks of pogroms in Russia. These were to drive the Jews back. They started off relatively mild, but got worse and worse. This juncture was to drive back the Russian and East European Jews. 1922 was for the West European Jews. 1948 was largely the Jews of North Africa and the Middle East, and then 1991 was for the remaining Jews of Russia again, who had been locked in as a punishment. The next one, May 2017, is for the Jews of North America. It is their turn to go back to Israel, and they will resist, as usual. And as usual, it will begin mildly, but get worse. I would expect a rise in anti-Jewish attacks, but more than that, this isn't just about QAnon supporters breaking windows in synagogues. On the modern political left, as in Europe, you can see a rising, fashionable hostility to Israel. Growing Islamic populations in the West are contributing to this. God will allow this to grow until the Jews of North America return to the Holy Land. On May the 12th and 13th, 2017, right on the very day of that fault line, Mahmoud Abbas accepted an invitation from Donald Trump to attend the White House to discuss the peace plan with the Israeli PM Netanyahu. Somewhere in the universe a bell tolled. Of course it came to nothing, just as Donald Trump's deal of the century came to nothing. But that was the 7th blasphemy. Again, in May 2017, Trump announced the creation of the Middle East Strategic Alliance, an attempt to create a unified coalition of regional states against Iran. It was as doomed as the deal of the century, but it sent an important message to the states of the area that America was pulling out and they would be expected to look after themselves. Nothing Biden is going to do will change that. At the same time, May 2017, NATO member Turkey was negotiating to buy the Russian S-400 missile system, which is even now causing tensions between the US and Turkey and may lead to Turkey leaving the NATO orbit. Biden has added to the problem by dredging up the massacre of Armenians by Turkey in 1915, a pointless and unnecessary provocation. And then there is Iran. Iran is the last great enemy of Israel, at least for now. The previous enemy was Saddam Hussein's Iraq, Once the most powerful military in the region, now a chaotic mess. Look again at that timeline. 1991 was a significant fault line. At the time, the United States had a handful of troops in Bahrain in the Middle East, nothing else apart from NATO troops in Turkey. But thanks to Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, America was dragged back in and has never left until now. I call them Pearl Harbor moments. Every time the US thinks she has escaped into isolation, some catastrophe drags her back, like 9/11. This led to the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Judgment fell for Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 2003, and the United States was the hammer. Judgment is coming for Iran too, of that we can be certain. But who will deliver it? Will the USA be able to walk away, or will she be dragged into the final conflagration? I don't know, but I predict that if she is dragged back in, no longer God's protector of Israel, it will be for one last destructive involvement. I claim no prophetic powers at all, but so far events would seem to be confirming the patterns of the timelines which I set out in my book almost a decade ago. By the grace of God, we in the West will survive, but how and in what form I cannot say. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all. Please read my book Concerning a Nation, published by Lulu. Thank you again.